Want to welcome you all. Thank you all for coming to join us for our Climate, Environment, and Health Legislative Forum. Just want to introduce myself as well as our other facilitator for this afternoon. My name is Lucretia. My name is Lucretia Daniels. I am the Executive Director of Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice, and I am joined by Amy Schultz, a professor at University of Michigan School of Public Health. This forum is being organized by M-LEEaD, a National Institutes of Health funded environmental health center based at the University of Michigan. And our aim is the center's aim is to improve understanding of the contribution of the environment to health. And the reason we're here today our goal is to help assure that scientific information is available to decision makers who are being asked to make decisions about Michigan's most pressing climate issues. Climate events cost communities in many ways, including but not limited to health. Climate events negatively impact Michigan communities, and really we want to be able to provide data to support that and to help expand everyone's knowledge about the specific ways that climate is impacting health. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our M-LEEaD Stakeholder Advocacy Board that helps to lead this work as well. This board is made up of community members that focus on health, environmental justice, advocacy, activism, and really just protecting the general health and well-being of those in Southeast Michigan specifically.
Thank you, Lucretia. And I am, before I introduce our panelists for the day and go through the show of the day, I want to introduce our co-sponsors. We're very grateful to Representative Mackinac and Representative Outage for co-sponsoring this forum today, and I'm going to turn the podium over so they have an opportunity to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Mackinac room. This is a beautiful venue. My name is Greg Markin, and I'm a state representative from the 110th district, which is way up in the land of ice and snow. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here today and co-sponsor this event. We have some incredible presenters today that are, just have a lot of information to present. And these are important topics throughout Michigan and throughout the United States and around the globe, so it's very important. Just recently, I took a trip to Finland, and the Europeans are much more condensed than we are here in the United States, and global justice and environmental justice is a very, very important topic over there, and we had some very, very interesting conversations. So enjoy today, absorb all the knowledge, and enjoy the Mackinac room. Thank you.
I think Representative Outage is not here today. Do you want to?
He's going to be a couple more seconds. We're going to get started.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going to wait just a moment for those comments. And in the meantime, I will go through the flow of the day. So following the welcoming comments from our co-sponsors, we will hear from 4 panelists who have expertise in various areas that are pillars of the My Healthy Climate Plan, which you may have heard of moving forward in Michigan. And I will introduce them in just a moment. We will then have some time for question and answers from those of you who are in the room. So there are 3x5 cards on your tables. If you have questions as the speakers are presenting, please feel free to write them down, and one of the staff members, the team that's in the back, will be circulating around. You can hand your question to them, or feel free, of course, to hold your questions until the Q&A session and ask them openly. And then after that, we have this room until 2 o'clock. We're planning on wrapping up the formal session at about 1:30, but we will have about a half an hour for informal conversation conversation with the panelists and with each other or any of us who are representatives of the M-LEEaD Center. We encourage you to talk to us, to reach out and contact us after this session if you have questions or would like to be connected to researchers and scholars who are working in the area of climate change. I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce our 4 panelists who we're really fortunate to have with us today. And if you guys would mind coming on up. Elizabeth Mack, who is a professor of geography, environment, and spatial sciences at Michigan State University. She has expertise in water affordability and is going to be speaking with us about her research on water affordability and impacts of climate change on what we can anticipate in terms of water affordability in the state of Michigan. Our second speaker is Devon Payne-Sturges, joining us here, who is joining us very graciously from the University of Maryland, where she works with the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health. Dr. Payne-Sturges brings expertise in cumulative impact, which is another pillar of the My Healthy Climate Plan. So we're very fortunate to have her with us today, speaking in her areas of expertise. Our third panelist is Dr. Carina Gronlund. She is a research professor and an epidemiologist with the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. Dr. Gronlund brings expertise in climate change and its implications for heat, and is going to be speaking with us about impacts of climate change and weatherization as an important opportunity to intervene to protect the health of residents who are experiencing climate change within their communities. And last, but of course not least, Professor Stuart Batterman is in the Environmental Health Sciences and Global Public Health, School of Public Health, and brings expertise in air quality. He's going to be talking with us about the impacts of climate change for wildfires and ultimately impacts for air quality and public health. So we're really fortunate to be joined by these 4 panelists today. I am looking around. I don't see Representative Outage yet, so he may join us, and when he gets here, we'll turn it over and provide him an opportunity to make some comments. But at this moment, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Mack, who's going to be talking with us about steps toward affordable water policy agenda.
Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on with water rates, trends in rates nationwide, what's going on with water rates in Michigan, and then how climate change fits into all of this. So relative to, so we have some information from the Consumer Price Index, which might be all too familiar with you. You might all be very familiar with it, given the current sort of inflation right now. But historical data shows that water and sewer rates, and when I talk about water, I'm going to talk about combined rates, water and sewer. Some people refer only to drinking water, but I'm going to be referring to both, and you'll see why that's really important here in a moment. So relative to all other items in the basket of goods that the government looks at for the CPI and also food prices, water and sewer rates have been going up steadily for quite some time. There are a variety of reasons for this, and it's really sort of place specific. So we've all heard about the unfortunate situation in Detroit, and I'll talk briefly about that. But people there are having their water shut off. Part of the reason behind that is, and this fits into how water is priced, is they have a shrinking customer population. So in the 1950s, when they were building out water infrastructure for DWSD to all the suburbs, they projected that the population would remain constant, and that obviously didn't happen. So we have a large fixed cost that people need to pay for, and a shrinking denominator of people to pay for that. So that means that each person is paying more for those fixed costs. Nationwide, we're seeing repairs to aging infrastructure. So a lot of our infrastructure is quite old, and how old depends on where you are. A lot of utilities have been deferring repairs to that infrastructure because it does mean an increase in water rates, and you'll see why when I talk about how water is priced. but those bills are coming due. And then on top of that, we have some of the impacts of climate change. So I have some statistics here for you. So climate adaptation measures for drinking water, so to maintain our drinking water quality, to deal with combined sewer overflows. This is when our sewer systems become overwhelmed and get sewage leaching out into the streets, and building more infrastructure to deal with all the stormwater from intense rain events, hurricanes, what have you. That's estimated by 2050 to cost about $36 billion. And when we look at stormwater from weather events alone, that bill is $5 to $10 billion. So these costs are projected to be quite significant. Okay. So why is it going to be really expensive? Why is climate change going to impact our water systems? And I have just a few examples of how this is projected to occur. So in coastal areas, saltwater intrusion or saltwater that's leaching into non-salt water is going to need to be purified to maintain drinking water quality, and this is going to come at a cost to deal with that. I talked about sewer overflows, so extreme weather events produce intense rain, which then overwhelms the current sewer systems that we have. And then you have raw sewage leaching out into the streets, and that is obviously a public health problem. Out west, we're seeing some slightly different threats. Well, we've also had extreme rain there recently as well, but one of the more popular sort of threads that's been going on for quite some time are drought surcharges. So in California, they're talking about putting a drought surcharge on water bills to encourage people to conserve water. And this is certainly a good thing. You know, people need to be aware that water is expensive. We need to conserve water. You know, we don't need to leave the tap on while we're brushing our teeth. But some of these conservation measures actually have disproportionate impacts on low-income households. So if a household already has trouble paying for water without any surcharges, tacking on a surcharge in addition to the fees that they're already paying for their water rates is going to disproportionately impact them. So it's fine that we might want to think about some surcharges to make people aware of how expensive water is, and it's becoming increasingly so, but we need to be mindful of how this is done and maybe think about some sort of income structure when putting these surcharges in place. Okay, so now I'll get into a lot of people said, well, so all these things are impacting the cost of water services. Why doesn't just the government pay for it? And if you're in the government, you might be sick of that line. So I have some statistics here just to show you that federal spending on water infrastructure has actually declined, and this or remained flat, which is what this graphic shows to you. And relative to that, the spending by state and local governments is going up and up and up. So the federal government used to chip in a lot more money to fund drinking water and sewer services, and they're no longer doing this. So I'll just say the main way that utilities pay for upgrades to infrastructure, maintenance, and improvements, they bill customers. So customers are the main way that all of these things are paid for. And so that's why it's such a concern that climate change is going to increase how much water services are, and it's the customer, unfortunately, that's going to have to pay for it because the money from government is increasingly just not there. Okay. Here's a quick snapshot. How is it impacting Michiganders? We've heard a lot about Detroit, but if you look at the thumb of Michigan here, some rural areas are also having affordability issues. So this isn't just an urban problem, but it's every Michigander problem where affordability is an issue. And this is from University of Michigan here, this graphic. I mentioned to you what's going on in Detroit. So if you cannot pay your water bill, the number of days that bill is past due varies by utility, but they can say, well, you have so many days to pay your bill and past due charges, and if you can't do this, then we're going to shut off your water, and then you have no water services. And to get it turned back on, you need to pay your past due charges, any fees associated to get it turned back on. Okay, so things are quite expensive, particularly if you're a low-income household. And so this is from a paper that came out just this year. We got some water shutoff data from Food and Water Watch, and we mapped that to figure out, what neighborhoods, and you can see some of those pointed out here in Detroit are particularly impacted by water shutoffs due to the inability to pay for water services. And obviously utilities don't want to be shutting off people's water because if they shut off people's water, then they don't have people to pay for the services. So this is something that we all need to work together to kind of figure out a solution for. So what are those solutions? There's a Senate bill up right now in Michigan that's to establish some basic affordability criteria. So what is affordable water? The benchmark for that varies quite a bit. Some people say 2%, 4%, 5%. So this bill is to set up a benchmark to say, you know, where do we draw the line for figuring out where when water is becoming unaffordable for people. So that's really important. Detroit Water has some customer assistance programs. So these are a range of programs for seniors, low-income households, where you can enroll in the program and get some sort of funds put towards your water bill, so you can get some sort of financial assistance. And then a really innovative approach, Philadelphia has done this first, Baltimore has also done this, is income-based billing. So they actually, I worked with Philadelphia to write up a paper about this, but they actually redid their entire customer billing system, and they compute customer-specific bills for people that are enrolled in their program. So they can say, based on your income, here's how much you need to pay for your water services every month. When they're enrolled in TAP, which is what the program is called, all past due amounts are deferred, so they don't have to pay that. And after they're enrolled in the program for so long, all of their past due amounts are forgiven. So this is one strategy for another strategy for helping people with this affordability problem. So a range of solutions presented here, and I think I'm out of time. So I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mack, for a very fast pass through a very complicated topic. I was remiss in introducing our panelists at the beginning. For those of you, many of you may have picked up a packet like this at the front desk when you came in. There is more information about water affordability and about each of the topics that the panelists will be talking about in this packet. And there's a QR code at the front of it. If you scan that QR code, there are additional, you can find all the resources in this packet on our website and some additional more academic papers that dig in a little bit deeper on some of these topics. So please do feel free to grab a packet if you don't already have one, and to access those resources. All right, it's my great pleasure to turn the podium over now to Dr. Payne-Sturges.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me. Again, my name is Devon Payne-Sturges, and I'm an associate professor of environmental sciences at the University of Maryland School of Public Health. And as I was preparing my remarks for this afternoon, I actually ran across a very interesting news story about the need and demand for enhanced training on drug interactions for pharmacists. So as you know, when we go to the pharmacy, to fill a prescription, we expect the pharmacist to actually look for the potential for drug interactions and to actually warn us about them. Statistics show that 70% of Americans take at least one prescription, and then more than 50% take more than 2 prescriptions. So that means that the majority of Americans are potentially at risk for a drug-drug interaction. So you're probably wondering, well, why is she talking about pharmacists, drugs, prescriptions? Well, I'm mentioning this issue because it's actually a common concern, and it's similar to the issue of what I'm going to talk about, and that is about cumulative environmental health risks and impacts from exposure to multiple environmental pollutants and chemicals in the environment, which also have the potential for interactions, except though these exposures that I'm talking about are not voluntary. So let me explain about that. So what do we mean by cumulative risks and impacts? The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency defines cumulative impacts, which I'm showing here on this screen, as a totality of exposures to combinations of chemical and non-chemical stressors and their effects on health, well-being, and quality of life outcomes. And they also go on to define cumulative impact assessment as a process for evaluating both quantitative and qualitative data representing cumulative impacts to inform a decision. These combined effects can be represented also by estimating health risks using traditional risk assessment methodology. So these definitions were recently put forward by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to inform its renewed efforts to address a problem they have known about since the 1970s, and still trying to figure out exactly how to go about addressing what I consider to be the reality in environmental health and environmental policy making. And that's what I have here on this slide. First of all, we are all exposed to multiple environmental pollutants and chemical contaminants in our daily lives. However, some population groups face higher exposures, not only to a single chemical, but also more exposed to multiple contaminants at the same time. For example, you may all be aware, racial disparities in the location of hazardous waste sites have been recognized since the 1970s. Studies on air pollution burdens continue to show that disparities for Black communities are more pronounced than disparities on the basis of poverty status. And these myriad of exposures, be it a single chemical or chemical pollutants in combination, are associated with many different adverse health outcomes, from low birth weight, developmental delays, dementia, ADHD, asthma, cancer, endocrine disruption, and cardiovascular disease. In addition, there is growing evidence that chemical mixture exposures often have higher toxicity than the individual components of that mixture, even when those components are at very low levels. In addition, there's growing evidence about the amplification of the health harms from chemical pollutant exposures by concurrent exposure to what environmental scientists often call non-chemical stressors, which is something that the US EPA included in their definition, especially among minority, low-income, or socially disadvantaged populations. Non-chemical stressors include poverty, adverse childhood experiences, lack of access to a good nutrition, substandard housing, noise. These non-chemical stressors have been found to act as effect modifiers, meaning they enhance the harm of pollutant exposures. And this has been demonstrated both in animal and human studies. And from my perspective, this just simply adds the urgency for why we really need to be focused on addressing cumulative risk and impacts, because of this likely contribution that is being made to environmental injustice and health equity. Now, we have the topic of climate change for this session, and I can say that we can expect climate change will worsen these environmental health disparities and cumulative risk and impacts. For example, heat can make air pollution worse. We know that during times of hot temperatures, the heat and sunlight actually cooks the air along with all the contaminants lingering within it and worsening the air quality. And this can lead to, frankly, a lethal combination. We have studies showing that the combination of extremely hot weather and air pollution can significantly increase the risk of fatal heart attacks. We also know further studies show in the US how the very same neighborhoods that are the hottest also have the most polluted air and the highest rates of respiratory ailments like childhood asthma. So we have to think about this connection between climate change as a threat multiplier and these environmental issues that we're concerned about. So how can we move forward about addressing cumulative risk and impacts? I think what needs to happen is both for EPA and their state counterparts, we need to be more creative in utilizing our existing legal authorities to address this issue, but also, having the courage to also address gaps in those authorities where necessary. I also think that it really takes more of a systems approach to address this issue, because different decisions in one, say, sector or program area can have impacts in another. We need this recognition that our policy decisions can have feedback relationships. Say a decision about transportation might have negative impacts on an issue within the housing sector, for example. The current focus of environmental agencies and advocacy groups in other states has been on addressing permitting decisions as a way to limit these cumulative environmental health burdens. The idea here is, instead of communities always being the ones responsible or doing the work to gather the information to document these cumulative burdens, it is something that the regulatory agencies are being more proactive about. They're the ones who are using their resources to gather the information and to routinely consider cumulative risk and impacts in their permit reviews. There are a number of states who are leading in this area, using the permit process to address cumulative risk and impacts. Minnesota actually was the first state in this country to actually require cumulative levels and effects assessments by permittees as part of their air permit application. This policy's actually been in place in Minnesota since 2008, so they have a long history and some, could be an interesting model to consider. Other opportunities include ramping up, enforcement and site cleanup activities, especially in communities already overburdened with environmental pollutants. But what about looking even further upstream in our regulatory system, such as regulating risks of a pollutant across all source categories at a polluting facility, and then all risks from all pollutants across all media? That's not going on right now, but we could think about that. Also, what about regulating toxicologically similar chemicals as a group or a class instead of trying to address them one at a time? And then what about accounting for exposure to these non-chemical stressors or population vulnerability when we're setting any kind of health-based standard? And then also I'd like to suggest ultimately we need to think about the role of land use and zoning policies and how that facilitates the siting of polluting sources. So this will require, more interagency collaboration, working across sectors, the identification of other types of decisions and other agencies that need to be brought into this discussion about addressing cumulative risk and impacts. So to wrap up really quickly, I'll end where I started, and that is if you think about it, it is the duty for pharmacists to look for and warn us about drug interactions, then environmental, public health, and other relevant governmental agencies responsible for regulating pollutants and chemicals into the environment can and should do the same thing. Consider cumulative environmental health impacts as part of their normal decision-making processes. And I'll just end here. Here's some references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Payne-Sturges. Welcome to those of you who are just joining us. We have a lovely taco bar in the back, so please go help yourself to food. And if you haven't already picked up a copy of the packet, I believe there are still some at the back table, so please go grab one. I also want to point in the packet, in the very end of the packet, there is a list of legislation that is currently been introduced or in the process of being introduced in the state, at the state level this fall. And it's organized according to the topics that each of our presenters are talking about. So if you're interested in looking specifically at what's coming down the pipe related to some of these issues, you can find some of that information at the back of the packet. All right, without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Carina Gronlund, who's going to talk to us about mitigating climate change.
All right, speaking of cumulative impacts, who's vulnerable to extreme heat? I think as we all know, extreme heat is increasing in frequency and duration and severity with climate change. Well, a lot of people are vulnerable to extreme heat. Older adults, organ systems change as we age, and skin and heart changes make it harder for the body to maintain a cool temperature. People with heart, lung, blood, kidney, or mental health problems or dementia, or people taking medications for those problems are vulnerable. The medications, many of the medications for these conditions suppress the body's ability to thermoregulate or even sense that it's too hot. Overheating increases the risk of sudden infant death syndrome in babies. Pregnant women are at risk. Extreme heat is associated with preterm birth. Outdoor workers, of course, are vulnerable, as are people living in highly paved urban areas that retain the heat. And of course, not having air conditioning or having transportation to get to a cooler location are characteristics of vulnerability. But it's not just heat we have to worry about with climate change. Over the course of 20 years, the length of the ragweed season has already increased 15 to 21 days in Michigan. And in addition to having longer growing seasons for allergens, the increase in the carbon dioxide increases the level of pollen that's produced, and it can also increase the allergenicity of grains of pollen. Our colleague Allison Steiner at the Climate and Space Sciences and Engineering Department and her team have estimated that by end of century, the levels of pollen in Michigan will have increased 16 to 40%. So this, increases in pollen can increase allergy and asthma symptoms and increase missed work and school days. And one of the solutions to that is air conditioning. Good air conditioner will filter outside air, and allergists routinely recommend that people stay in air-conditioned homes on high pollen days. Dr. Batterman's going to talk more about wildfires, but one of the things you may remember having recommended to you is to go inside, close your windows, and turn on an air conditioner that will filter the air. So there are a lot of challenges to climate resilience. 1 in 5 Americans reports having in the previous year had to make a trade-off between paying down utility bills or buying food or medicine. And that's called the heat or heat dilemma. One of our study participants several years ago also referred to housing in Detroit, and I think this applies to housing in Michigan in general, as hot little boxes. These are homes that were built to be resilient to heat, to hold in the heat, to be resilient to very cold days. And in some cases, they're not even very good at that. But they're not good at keeping the heat out in the summer. In Detroit in particular, redlining is an issue. Discriminatory lending practices have prevented communities of color from making the upgrades necessary to adapt to the current and changing climates. Energy justice is also a piece of this puzzle. This is a map of exposure to air pollution just from DTE energy power plants in 2018. And as you can see, the most exposed areas include Detroit, and this correlates strongly with neighborhoods of color. It also correlates with socioeconomic status. You can see that downriver areas and areas around East China are more exposed. We took this a step further and estimated the health costs associated with exposure to DTE air pollution, and estimated that in those most exposed areas, the per person annual cost was around $100. What if a heat wave occurs at the same time as a power outage? This picture is from a study we did in partnership with researchers at Arizona State University and Georgia Tech. You do not want to be in Phoenix during a heat wave and a power outage. We estimated that around 13,000 deaths would occur in that scenario. And we also estimated that around half of the population would be sick enough to need to go to the emergency department. Things were better in Michigan. Michigan, as it turns out, is not a bad place to be in this scenario, but in Detroit, we estimated 200 excess deaths in this scenario. Now, in the power on scenario, in Phoenix, we estimated that about 20 deaths occur usually, and in Detroit, around 100 deaths. And the difference there is not only the climate, but also air conditioning. We accounted for the fact that many Detroiters do not have air conditioning. This also emphasizes the importance of having a backup power method like solar to be able to at least run a fan in a scenario like this. So what can we do? We can definitely decrease fossil fuel emissions. We can increase access to cool spaces. We can improve heat health warning systems to alert people when the days are going to be hot or the pollen is going to be high. Weatherization of homes checks a lot of these boxes because it's a mitigation strategy. If your home is weatherized, you're using less energy to heat and cool your home. It makes cooling the home more cheaper and more energy efficient. It makes it possible for some homes to purchase and operate air conditioners. And it also, when it's targeted towards communities of color and low-income communities, it addresses energy justice. So by weatherization, I mean insulation, air sealing, upgrading appliances to more energy efficient models, upgrading HVAC systems, potentially also installing air conditioners where there were not air conditioners before. And when you do that, when you seal the building envelope, you make the indoor temperatures more comfortable, you reduce noise and air pollution coming from outdoors. Along the way, some of the weatherization measures also involve mold remediation. And of course, the primary purpose of weatherization is to reduce utility costs. But when you've done all these things, there are also health benefits. With the improved thermal comfort, you can get improved sleep. We're currently doing some research now to quantify that. I'm wearing an actigraph actually to test this before giving it to a participant, and it measures sleep. But with this reduced exposure to extreme temperatures, we would also expect improved heart, lung, and brain function. And with those improvements to utility bills, we would expect less psychosocial stress and depression. And all of these health effects interact with each other in a good way. So I'd like to end with this old quote from the Lancet Commission on Climate Change, that tackling climate change could be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. Climate change mitigation creates opportunities to reimagine homes and cities in ways that support and promote healthy lifestyles. And with respect to housing, climate change can provide a broader framework to address not only persistent healthy homes issues, but also issues related to thermal comfort and mitigate climate change and reduce health disparities. Thank you.
Thank you, Carina, and especially for offering some hard tips for things that actually can be done to mitigate adverse effects of climate change. And again, there's a number of fact sheets in your packets that speak to this issue in greater depth, and some information on the website. If you go there, you can find more. So last but not least, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Batterman, who is going to speak with us about wildfires and their implications for air quality. And again, encourage those of you who are sitting around the tables, if you have questions, feel free to use the 3x5 cards to write them down. We will circulate around and pick those up. Or you can just hold your questions, and we'll have an opportunity for conversation at the end. Dr. Dan.
Thanks. Well, I'm your closer, so I'll go out in a flash with a fire. So thank you for inviting me and to follow these wonderful speakers. So I have really divided my talk into two parts. One is a situation analysis to tell you how bad things are and that they're going to get worse. Okay, and we need to be prepared. And then the second part are some policy recommendations. And it's kind of a broad brush is all I can do this afternoon. On the reception table, there are some more details with these policy recommendations, which have been gleaned from experiences in other countries and other states. So, the bad news. Wildfires pose a significant threat to public health. This is evident to everybody having lived through the summer. We've seen unprecedented levels of PM 2.5, the small particles that we breathe down. We've had advisories, AQIs, and a 300-400 level across the state. We've never seen that before. The same is applied to other states that have never experienced this kind of particulate matter before. We know a lot about that. We know forest fires produce a variety of pollutants, not just PM. The smoke can travel far. We know the impacts of this smoke, as some of the discussion just before has talked about, and we know many people are vulnerable, okay, because of a variety of existing conditions. They have to work outdoors, they don't have air conditioning, they don't have filters, and so forth. This risk is going to increase. Okay, climate change will boost temperatures, it will boost extreme weather, we'll have prolonged droughts, soils will dry out. People are living in forested areas. How much of Michigan is forested? 53%. How much of that is actively managed to reduce hazardous fuels? Well, it depends. There are 400,000 families that own forest lands. Only 20% of them participate in a management program. The risk is big. So forest management practices increases hazardous fuel loads. If we look over the trends here on the left side, you'll see the trend for the amount of acres burned in the US. It's averaged about 8 million acres per year. That's about 12,000 square miles. On the right, in a different scale in hectares, we see the trend for Canada. Up to this year, it was also about the same, about 12,000 square miles. 2023 was an anomaly. Went way up in Canada, fires all over the place. In August, there were 1,000 fires, most of them out of control in Canada, and to date, something on the order of 59,000 square miles has been burned in Canada, many times the average. What does that mean? That's bigger than the state of Michigan. Okay, the graphic here is the most I could find. It shows New York. Michigan is bigger than New York. Okay, last bit of the situation analysis is we know what to do. Okay, there are a number of things that can protect people, property, and save lives. Some of these actions have to occur before the fire. Forest lands management, landscaping, hardening, building, smoke resiliency efforts, filters, and things like this. Things to do during the fire, and also to avoid harming first responders, entrapment, and things like this. We know what to do. Rescheduling events, getting people indoors, and then after the fire. And you can bet people are going to be affected, and to protect public health, we need to anticipate that certain populations will need follow-up, surveillance. Okay, so to turn to some policy recommendations, Michigan actually has some good programs dealing with forest lands stewardship. The problem is, as I mentioned, relatively few people are participating in those programs, so we need to boost that. We need to have built environments that are fire fit. I don't know if you've seen what's been happening in California in lands and homes that are in forests, but they are changing the landscaping to reduce the risk of the building burning down and the fire spreading. Obviously, we need to worry about and equip our first responders, and we need to do things like mapping vulnerability, property at risk, resources that are available just to get better prepared. Second policy recommendation has to do with the workforce, especially the first responders. And there's a number of things here, but I want to focus on the third bullet point, which is that you can anticipate that these fighters will have issues because they're going to see a lot of death and destruction and damage, and we need to deal with the mental health as well as the physical health of these individuals. Okay, Coming back to sort of things that were talked about earlier, we need to promote safe indoor environments and smoke-resilient buildings. This is especially needed where there are vulnerable populations, older people, people at risk due to their health conditions because of cumulative effects, for example. Getting people indoors is not enough. We measured smoke levels and PM levels during the fires this summer, and that smoke, when it comes in through the little cracks in the buildings, weatherization will help, lingers. It doesn't just disappear. It's very happy just staying in the environment and breathing. You need good filters to bring it down. Those have ratings like MERV 13 or HEPA filters. We don't have many of them in most of the institutional buildings as well as homes. And this is demonstrated by Michigan trying to give schools better filters to deal with COVA under IRA funding, but a minority of schools actually participated in taking free filters from the state with a $100 million program. So we need to actually ensure that these things happen. And we should provide special assistance to low-income communities and get a certification system underway, something like the EPA Indoor Air Plus program. It's voluntary, but it helps boost the level of performance of buildings. We need to promote and make available safe spaces. It's not just cooling centers anymore, but it's clean cooling centers. Places where people can go, they know about it. We need to provide transportation to get folks there. And again, those spaces should be certified that they actually work properly. There are many things individuals can do. This is a picture of a recent article in the New England Journal of Medicine talking about ways to reduce your exposure and your health risks. We've heard some of that today already. We need to have forecasts that help people do that. And I work very closely with Eagle. They have improved their air quality forecasts, but our forecasts only go ahead a day or so. And if you're going to reschedule events, you'd like to know how long, how bad is it going to be. There's a number of outreach messages and coordination among different agencies that needs to happen. We need to identify the most effective messaging. We need to evaluate these campaigns as well. The sixth recommendation is to anticipate that we're going to have damage. Michigan's been very lucky. We've only had a few thousand acres burned, and on average, only a couple hundred fires per year. This could change. Fires have been getting bigger, and Michigan could be at risk. And we need to anticipate we're going to have a need to care for survivors, people who are displaced. We're going to need to deal with the cross-jurisdictional issues to help them with their basic needs, as well as trauma, mental health, and emotional well-being. And finally, my last recommendation is to provide for program effectiveness. This is something that we're going to be dealing with for a long time. And so a structured way to find what works best and to boost those elements of the program is going to be very important. Well, my closure is from an old picture that I think I remember growing up in New Jersey with the Pine Barrens, and I think this is at Batstow. And please be careful, only you can prevent forest fires. I'm sure you all, well, maybe not all of you, you're all younger than me, can remember this, okay? But this is no longer enough. Where this is going to be happening, it's going to be part of our new normal, and we need ways to be resilient and prepared and provide for folks to minimize the impacts. I'll stop. Thank you.
All right, thank you to the panel for some excellent presentations, in some ways very sobering. Some cross-cutting themes I think that we heard across the panelists. Increasing risks are anticipated with climate change, heightened heat, more stress on our water systems, and also the idea of cumulative impacts, that there are multiple impacts that can accrue in some communities who may be more vulnerable both to the exposures and to the adverse effects of those exposures.